So I'm camped out here at Canoe Creek. It's got rain in the forecast tomorrow. I'm going to shoot a little outfitting video for you. Just show you the creek real quick. Let me show you some of the tools we use and get started. Starting from left to right, I have a yellow rasp, which is basically a Sureform. They also have them in a long file type rasp, but I like these small curved ones. Next to the right, we have a coarse grain foam block with sandpaper on it. It's good to finish up and get rid of some of the imperfections left by the rasp. I do most of my large cuts with the bread knife. A longer is better. This is what I have, so this is what I'm using. And then I also like to have a nice sharp straight bladed knife as well. One thing to think about with the knife is the width of the blade is going to impact how you're able to cut radiuses in the thigh hooks and turn the blade. And then of course I have your red can Weldwood contact cement. This is available in two different formulas, a gel formula and the original. Either works, but I prefer the original. This is a fresh new 91 and I'm getting ready to outfit it, but I first want to talk about the first cuts that I make. The stock saddle is one size fits a few people, but one of the immediate cuts you have to make is on the inside of the thigh on both sides. This corner on both sides will cut into your femoral artery and create a spot for your legs to fall asleep. So one of the first cuts I make is taking out this 90-degree angle on the inside of my thighs. Don't worry too much about the rough cuts with the bread knife. You'll be able to clean that up with a Sureform as you go on. The next cut I make is on the back of the saddle. I know from my past boats that I'm taking about an inch out of the back of the saddle, and I know that Alex and a lot of the guys in the options making this inner cut and then cutting the back of the saddle is pretty much all they do. The thigh hooks are pretty good size for your average person, but I am not your average person, so I'm gonna have to cut a lot more foam out of this. Now that I got the back of the saddle and the inner thighs cut out, that's pretty much your most basic, what I would suggest everyone do to a new saddle, those three cuts. Now I have a 38-inch inseam and a lot of leg to fit in here, so I know I have to cut probably a solid inch or two out of these thigh hooks to get my legs in. Now I do this in generally 3 stages. I do an outer cut, an inner cut, and then an all the way inner cut. That allows me to take out as little foam as possible and less likely to overcut. Now that I got some preliminary cuts made, I'm just gonna hop in and see what's touching where. So my butt is still a few inches off the seat. My legs aren't all the way in the thigh hooks. My first cuts were pretty generous, but I know I still got a lot more to go. So what I'm doing is feeling where my legs are touching the foam so that I can remove foam from the right areas inside the saddle. It's not an exact science. If this is your first time outfitting a boat, you might be doing this a lot more, cutting a little bit, hopping in, cutting a little bit more. I know from experience that I probably have another inch to take out of this before I fit in, but that still doesn't stop me from taking my time and going in increments so as not to overcut foam and have to glue it back in. But that shouldn't be too much of a concern because mini cell is easy to deal with, and if you do overcut it, you can always add foam back in. So I'm gonna hop out and make a few more cuts. Again, the bread knife is my tool of choice for making most of these large cuts. Let's see what we got. All right, so again, I'm feeling the saddle, where it's touching my legs, and where I need to remove foam. So my left leg is getting in there pretty good now. I feel the outside touching the outside of my leg and stopping it from going in. So I'm getting a little bit closer. I'm going to take a little bit more out from the outside. So I'm on my third go around of hopping in the boat, feeling where there's pressure on my leg, getting out, removing more material, hopping in the boat, feeling where there's pressure on my leg. One thing of note is that when you're carving out the foam, you want your knees to be as far over the chines, as wide as possible in your boat. And because of that, you want to be cutting more foam from the outside than the inside. You want to leave material on the inside as a wedge to drive your knees out. That'll give you more control and it'll also feel more stable with your knees spread apart. All right, I'm getting pretty close now. I'm going to give one more go around with my bread knife and then I'm going to start cleaning it up. So I just want to show you how I'm a little bit asymmetrical with how I made my cuts here. And so a lot of this is done by feel. It feels good when I'm in there. When I take a step out, I can see that the left leg is cut a little different than the right leg. It's not a big problem. I know that my right leg is a little bit shorter than my left leg, not enough to make a difference with this. But I'm just gonna go back and take a step back, look at it, and try and even things up from side to side a bit. Just to give you an idea of how much foam I'm removing, this was my first cut. I knew it would need to be about an inch. My second cut is between 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8, and my last cut was about 1/4 inch. You want to take your big cuts first, and then each consecutive time be taking less and less material as you get closer to your final shape. And this will help you from overcutting foam or removing too much material. All right, so I have the bulk of the material removed. I can now get down into the saddle to where I want to be. My butt is still just barely touching the saddle, but for the most part, I got most of the bulk material removed. From this point, we're gonna ditch the bread knife and move to a sure form and start cleaning up some of the cuts that we've made. All right, at this point, with our bulk material removed, we're gonna move to a rasp or a sure form, whatever you wanna call it, and start cleaning up some of these rough cuts. Now you can see some of the grooves that the bread knife left. I can just take this sure form and start smoothing it out. I wanna remove where these 90 degrees are, anything that's gonna catch and then later rip from my dry suit. And this is where a lot of your fine tuning will be as well. Just like how you hopped in, felt where there was pressure on your leg, removed material, you're gonna continue to do that, except now you're removing micro doses of mini cell at a time instead of larger cuts. And it does clean up pretty well. If you want to take it a step further, a rough grit sanding block will smooth the foam a step further than the sure form. And now we're starting to do the finishing touches. I've cleaned up my cut with the rasp. I've gone in a few more times, removed the rest of the bulk material. Now what I'm doing is fine tuning. So I know that my knee is still touching pretty tight further in there. My outside diameter is fine, but I still need to remove a little more material towards the knee. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that with the rasp in small increments. Again, I fit in the boat right now, it's just a little tight. I know that with winter layers on, I won't, so I'm just gonna take a little bit more out to get that perfect fit. So another tip for dialing in your outfitting, anywhere you touch foam, if you contour this foam to the part of your body that's touching it, you can increase your comfort a lot with a very little amount of foam removal. So what I do in the back is I like to curve it for my back, and I also like to curve it down slightly, and then this acts like a back band, like in a kayak. It kind of forces your posture to be correct. Instead of being a lazy position, you're in a more aggressive forward position. So I'm just going to go in here and remove a little bit of foam. And you'd be amazed at what these little bits of foam removing do for you in terms of comfort. Another area where those little bits of foam can make a difference are right where my knee goes. I know my knee's right in this area on this knee pad. So I'm just gonna make a small depression in the shape of my knee. Now you can kneel in there and take a Sharpie around the front of your knee from the front, or you can just kind of guess. But the foam will depress from your weight over time and give you this little divot, so you really don't want to take too much. But I find just a little bit of a divot right where your knee goes can also drastically improve your comfort right off the bat. All right, we're just about done here. To recap, our first and most important cuts are on the inner thigh on either side, removing this 90-degree bend where your femoral artery on your inner thigh is touching. And then the second cut was removing the back of the seat. I then went in and sat down and cut a little bit out of each thigh hook, hopped in the boat, cut a little bit more, hopped in the boat, rinse and repeat until I got myself fitting in it pretty good. And then I took my sure form and I cleaned up all my rough cuts. I shaped the back a little bit to the contour of my back. I had a little depression where the knees go. And for all intents and purposes, you could call it quits right now. I'm gonna go a little bit further and show you how I do my hip pads as well. Now that my saddle is all cut to fit, there's a couple more things that I like to do before calling it quits with my outfitting. One being hip pads and one being ankle blocks. So for hip pads, you'll notice I'm all the way down in the saddle. When I'm rolling or engaging an edge, I'm hip snapping. And you can see I have all this slop in my hip snap that is lost boat motion. So when I roll, I have this much motion before the boat will start to roll. And so in order to eliminate that, I'm gonna add some hip pads. Now there's a couple different variations of hip pads. I'll show you the ones that I use, but I'll also show you where other people install them as well. For my hip pads, I like to just make a continuation of the bulkhead on the outside of my leg. And the way I came to this is just sitting in my boat, trying to hip snap, feeling where the loss of motion was, and then just sticking foam until I lost that motion. Now that motion goes directly into the boat. Now these are comically large. They definitely need some adjustment, but it gives you the idea. Just for the sake of variety, some people also like their hip pads actually back on either side of their hips. I've also seen them go all the way around, continuing the bulkhead up to the sidewall foam. Now I don't like that for a number of reasons. One, the Octane 91 is so wide. I like to be able to scoot my butt over while side surfing or take an impact to the side with my hips. But mainly I think it's an entrapment hazard. By having the block here, you have a spot where your ankle can go. If you have the whole thing foamed out, again, there's somewhere for your foot or ankle to get entrapped. So I like mine just a continuation of the thigh hooks on either side. It seems to translate the motion just as well as if they were back where my hips are as well. But that's one of those personal preference things. I've seen it done in a variety of ways, and this is just the way that I do it. I also wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about contact cement. There's been a lot of debate on whether it's best to do it wet, whether it's best to do it dry, how many coats. What I like to do is I like to use a scrap piece of foam. You can use a throwaway brush or one of those foam brushes. I find a scrap piece of mini cell works just fine. And I just use it like a squeegee and do a nice even coat over the whole surface. Now what I like to do is at least one coat on both sides, let that dry all the way. Then sometimes I'll do 2 coats letting it dry all the way, depending on how patient I am and what part is being glued. But I usually do about 2 coats, letting that dry all the way, and then the 3rd coat I let tack up, and then once it's tacky, I touch the 2 sides together. So I'm gonna do this on both of these as well as on the inside of the boat. Let it dry, get another coat or 2 on, and then I'll get back to you when I'm sticking them back together. Contact cement is nice and tacky now. So I'm gonna go ahead and I trace the outline of where it's gonna go just with the edge of a knife. You can use a fingernail or a marker, whatever you want. Just stick it in there. Alright, so my hip pads are glued in place. I did my rough cut. I'm taking my rasp and just smoothing it out. And that pretty much does it for my hip pads. For those of you that lay your feet flat along the hull, this would be pretty much it. Unfortunately, I cannot paddle in that position for very long, so I also need to add ankle blocks. Now for ankle blocks, you're just going to take some more mini cell along your void there and there to meet the angle that your shin will be at with your feet on the pegs, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So when you're kneeling with your foot on the pegs, I have this gap under my leg, and I need support on my ankle there because I can't lay my foot flat like this for any long period of time. So I would just glue a piece of foam on the bottom and then shave it to support your ankle where it goes inside of the boat. All right, we've gone from a factory saddle, to a saddle that now Sasquatch can fit in. But I think I've covered pretty much everything I need to. I think it's worth mentioning that it is not 100%. It's probably 90%. I got a little bit more shaving to do, a little fine tuning to do after getting wet in it, getting in my dry suit, my full gear. I think it's also worth noting that I'm outfitting this for wintertime. I'm going to be wearing layers under my dry suit. In the summertime, I find that I'm not too worried about the little bit of slop. If you are, you can add some shims in there. You could potentially Velcro them in or glue them in and remove them. But I think the key with outfitting is you get what you put into it. The more time you put into it, the more comfortable you'll be. The more comfortable you'll be, the more you'll enjoy paddling. So take some time, set it up in your living room, hop in and out of the boat, 100 times if you have to, removing a little foam at each time. As you outfit a few boats, you'll become more comfortable taking more foam at once. Like I said, I probably did about 3 big chops and then my fine tuning with this outfitting. My last one, it was probably 15 times getting in and out. But you feel free to hit me up if you have any questions. Otherwise, I hope that this video was informative. Thank you.